All right. We've got another session coming up. And this one is about dumb security remote work. No, I mean smart security remote work. Obviously, when COVID happened, it turned the world upside down, and it really launched for a number of companies big initiatives for BYOD, all sorts of things, and of course, remote hybrid work. And some organizations, they have been forever changed. So in this next panel, it's my pleasure to introduce George, who needs no welcome or intro. But George, why don't you head on out and get this panel started? Maybe he's busy doing something back there. There he is. All right.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Okay. So we'll let our panelists come out, and I'll do a quick little introduction. Thanks for coming out, guys. So this morning's session, obviously, we're going to be talking about security in the remote work environment. I'm joined today by three very wonderful folks who I've had a chance to have phone calls with, and I'll just go one by one. Immediately to my right, from OPG, Ms. Ranjika Manamperi. Ranjika, if you want to stand up. And from a company that you've probably seen everywhere because you cannot turn any LinkedIn post without seeing Netskope, Mr. Micone. And probably one of the leading cybersecurity suppliers, not only in Canada, but in the entire world, from CrowdStrike, Mr. Mike Vamvakaris. Okay. Oh, it's nice to sit down. These chairs are nice. So I'd like to start off by kind of bringing up the topic of what does the idea of being your own CISO at home mean to you? Ranjika, go ahead.
Sure. I've been a CISO in a couple of companies, and I'm going to say every role I've taken has been different. The mandates have been different. Some of the challenges have been different. So I would say be your own CISO is really define your own path as you take on this role.
Mike?
Talking with people like Ranjika every day, the concern now is we are in this hybrid world that we work in today. About 70% of people now, or organizations, do have a hybrid type of role, and the concern is now that they are accessing, applications from home. The data center has now shifted away from on-prem, and you, the user, where you're working from, has become, the new DC, right? The new data center. So we're starting to see a lot of shift of how do we protect what we do from home now.
Appreciate it. There's a question later on about on-prem versus cloud, so thank you for bringing that up. If I can call you this, Mike V.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Probably similar. The thing I would add is that you have to be aware of a workforce strategy and policy, similar to having cybersecurity policies on-prem. When you talk about being your own CISO, you have to understand what you're accessing, and some of those policies now have to filter at the work or the home office. So making sure you're aware of these policies, enforcing them, and having good cadence and practicing everything from hygiene and understanding what you're accessing, because this is typically was always done for you, but now you have a new line of defense that you have to consider. So that's probably the biggest thing you have to realize, because now the perimeters have been extended into the ether, essentially, right?
So I think that really hits the nail on an important point, especially in the home office environment, where we oftentimes will have a bring your own device policy in many organizations that we work at. So folks are using their home, like their personal cell phones, mobile devices, and their personal computers and their personal internet, all at the level of protection that these personal devices are configured at to conduct business operations. So how do we in this era actually extend that perimeter? How do we conduct identity access management? How can we actually ensure some degree of endpoint protection while still protecting the privacy of individuals and their households? There's a ball up in the air.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we see that a lot. And the reason why we do see that is the internet has changed, right? If we think about what the internet was 5 years ago, we were worried a lot about CNN.com and we were worried about websites that we didn't want our users going to. Today, traffic patterns have changed completely. Today now, more than 65% of web traffic is actually destined to a cloud application, right? So the patterns of the internet has changed, and now you need visibility and control into these SaaS applications, which we're now seeing on average about 2,400 exist in an organization. And in the past, it was more, we're going to block these applications or we're going to allow these applications. But today, because that user is working from home or from a Starbucks or in another country, we now need to have that visibility. So today, you can access non-sanctioned applications and have visibility and control over it, as opposed to trying to backhaul that traffic back to on-prem. You can allow that user to go straight to that application and provide control and visibility into it.
Ranjika, you work at OPG.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, so the SaaS adoption has increased. So definitely that is something that we're seeing more of. But we're also, and it's public knowledge that we're a big partner of Microsoft. And so there's a lot of applications that are now on Azure, which really changed over the last 2 years. So because of COVID, there was a big change, that shift to remote work. But one of the things we had to do was to also look at how we publish our applications so that it's easy for our employees to use. And it's not just employees too, right? It's vendors, it's contractors. So when you think of bring your own device, for me, it's the full gamut of all your users. So, in addition to using the traditional methods of VPN and Citrix, we're still looking at, okay, what's the next evolution? How can we balance that, the user's productivity in being able to access these applications as well as the visibility? I think that's really critical. Visibility, where's our data going, who's accessing what, and bringing it to that zero trust and identity, making identity the basis. Definitely some challenges with that because the tools, the traditional tools don't give you all of that.
Well, what's awesome is that we have someone who's an endpoint specialist,
Yes.
Mike V. How do we help maintain this visibility?
I mean, absolutely. Just on a general theme, I mean, the more you understand what's going on the endpoint, the better chance you have of thwarting an attack, right? So if you don't understand who's potentially knocking at the front door of the home, you can't defend the crown jewels, so to speak. So similar themes, you want as much telemetry as you can. Obviously raw data from the endpoint, whether it's going to the cloud, the local area network, or back through the VPN. The other thing I would say is that's really important with the endpoint is obviously layering, it's not cool or fun, but the whole notion that patch management, right? So when we look at threats, when CrowdStrike gets called in, usually 9 times out of 10, it has something to do with an older operating system, something that was legacy, something that was forgot, and having the remote management tools to do that. That's probably the thing I haven't heard so far is layering management tools on top of endpoint. Endpoint alone is great. Yeah. Well, they have an endpoint guy, but alone, you have to have a multiple layer with cloud, endpoint, remote management software. And the last one I see, it's crucial that we don't think about hot off the front line is like when you do get breached, how are you going to respond to your remote nodes, right? Because they used to be in the castle, right? But now they could be on BYOB devices. Right? Do you have consent to do that? Can you do containment and retrospective analysis on those nodes that are not in the organization? So those are topics that everyone should be concerned about.
Are you finding though that some of your clients, obviously don't name names, but are some of your clients now engaging in the act of trying to get people to install agents on their personal devices if they're running professional or work applications on those devices?
Yeah, absolutely. In a hybrid model, after COVID, we saw both. We saw companies that didn't want to invest in the business use laptop for whatever reason, opportunity cost. So they had their own laptops. They had to get home without an agent or some type of visibility. That real-time telemetry that we're all talking about just doesn't exist. So it's table stakes. If it's BYO, bring your own device, or a corporate asset, you need real-time telemetry to defend.
And I'd like to add to that, George, if you're doing bring your own device, that should be condition of allowing that personal machine on your network or to access the applications, right? So it is an agreement between the organization and the user if we are using those devices. For me, it's a win-win for both, but it has to be an agreement on what you can do, what you can't do, and the rights of the company versus individual.
Now, this actually brings up a good point. Mike, you started off on this. in the world of data centers, right? I mean, people are still, and in the States they still exist, these massive, hundreds of meters long buildings, just racks and racks and racks on data space. Now it seems, at least from the Canadian government standpoint and a lot of Canadian industry, there was a mass migration to the cloud. Are you finding that there are holdouts still holding on to their brick and mortar data centers? Or are you finding now that everyone's kind of jumped to the cloud and we're trying to figure out how to run secure environments in the SaaS-based model?
Yeah, good question. We are seeing a tremendous shift to the cloud. And what's happening is, back to that point about where the user now exists, we would always rely on, I guess you would say, a lot of hardware legacy products, and I'm not trying to ditch legacy products, I'm just saying those are good for a purpose. But if you look at what I go back to when I say the internet has changed, a lot of these products were, I'm a firewall and I see this user going to AWS. But in reality, when you decode that user is really not going to AWS, they're going to a personal instance of GitHub, and they're trying to upload something to a personal version of Gmail. So what we're seeing is that users now say, we're going to go straight to the internet. We're going to have a faster user experience because now, remember, CISO's in this room, right? If you're on a business trip in Toronto, you go on a personal vacation to the Caribbean, you're going to go to the closest data center and you're going to have greater security and greater performance without having to backhaul that traffic. So customers that I thought maybe would never go there, like government, like big banks, they are shifting faster than I've ever seen in the last 2 years. So they are allowing users to go direct to cloud because there's now a way to secure it, and there's now a way to give you better visibility. And to your point earlier, a traditional VPN gives access to the entire network, right? Whereas zero trust model will only grant access to that application that user is going to. So it's changed a lot, and we're seeing that shift.
So Ranjika, I asked this question having worked a long time in the high security world myself, especially on the public side. In the heyday of my military years, I never would have imagined doing classified level work from home, right? And I still think they're trying to work out kind of like the kinks on that. But how have you found in your high security environments, you're able to balance between what can leave your site and what you can allow your folks to actually work from home on?
Yeah, when it comes to SCADA environment, there's no remote access. You can't work from home.
Yeah.
And it all depends, of course, on the classification. So secret level classification, you actually have to be in the building to be able to access that information. And what we're finding is that sometimes we're very liberal with our classification, that things that don't need that level of security, we tend to be very conservative and classify it that way. So we are really looking at because when we classify something top secret, it really should be that could have a national security impact. We don't really handle that type of information. 90% of our information isn't that. But in terms of the SCADA environment, we cannot have anyone access that environment remotely. But in terms of information, it really does look at classification. And really a lot of that is also, we have to engage with our regulators. Part of it is also because certain industries, we've relied on physical segmentation, physical security to protect information in our systems. So it's kind of getting to think a little differently to say, well, you can have this logically, you can have it in the cloud, and you can actually have it more secure. But it's actually getting that mindset to change and understanding the new solutions that are out there, like SASE solutions, that could give us more visibility.
So then kind of my retort to that, not really a retort, but it kind of, throughout COVID, everyone was working on site then, basically.
There were, yes.
Okay. Do you ever foresee a time, and eventually I'm going to slap this over to Mike V because I want to get the endpoint perspective on this. Do you ever see a time where we're going to be able to transfer that classified environment to an individual who can then do it from a secure home-based network? Or will we forever be bound by chain to the actual site facility if you happen to work in a high security environment?
I think in Canada it's a bit different because, these are discussions we've been having with the likes of Microsoft, is in the US, they've got the government cloud, right? It's been built to very specific federal regulations. The Canadian market is not big enough for them to build that type of cloud. So if we can get there, if our federal government can influence and we can even leverage that, I think we'll get there. I don't think that, I mean, we do still have applications in the cloud. So when it comes to corporate information, we're there. Where we'll never be able to move is going to be SCADA environments, just because for those systems, it's safety, right? That's number one. It's not confidentiality, integrity, it's availability and it's safety. If you, the example of the Florida water plant attack that happened about 2 years ago, that was what, remote access, a TeamViewer instance was left open, a hacker got in, and they were able to change the, the sodium hydroxide level that could have potentially poisoned the water plant, the water, right? So those are the implications. So with so Ontario Power Generation, for example, we have nuclear power. We also have renewable power. Yep. So we have to think of safety. So therefore, that'll never be, we enforce air gapping. And air gap means real air gap with the physical segmentation. So I don't ever foresee that ever being opened up. People will have to go into the control room, manage those systems. You can monitor the communications because you can't patch it or there's vulnerabilities. So you kind of have this interim protection. But really, it's a lot of conversations with our stakeholders to say we need to move off of this and update. Now, operational technology is totally different. Again, SCADA environments are different. Thank goodness it is isolated, but it's more challenging to update those environments than it is in the technology environment. But this is something we're also looking at is the edge security service, because even if anyone gets in, you can only see the applications you're authorized to see. The identity piece, like bringing that identity to the endpoint, really helps with that. So it's a solution that we're evaluating now.
Sweet. Mike, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think Ranjika nailed it. It's really a business risk conversation when you have that legacy application. I mean, our lens is when you see a breach on these Windows NT servers, or if you're working with CrowdStrike or any vendor and said, well, Mike, you don't have an agent for these proprietary systems, then it becomes a business risk, right? And are you prepared to put a 3-ring fence around that old node? Or you have a migration path, understanding that there's OpEx and CapEx that you need to spend on that. So appetite of risk, of keeping that old node or device in the network. What's the risk vectors? And can that be used as a jump off point? You could air gap it, but then you have patch management issues, and so that's not going to be very remote friendly because you have that old NT server. So I think it has to go onto a migration. Cloud is an answer for sure. The tool sets are out there. The endpoint, the integration of identity now is happening as we speak on top of CASB. And I just think there's also the awareness. You asked a great question earlier, Mike, how do you approach this? You have to go in the environment before you start solutioning and understanding these weak links. And I think that use case you gave is probably one of the biggest ones we see. Right? I don't want to do anything because it's been there, it's been working for 25 years. Okay, great. Are you ready for that to be your weakest link in the chain? Yeah. And then you call CrowdStrike breach services. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's how we approach that. Yeah,
that kind of leads into another topic I'd like all of your perspectives on, because it's fascinating to me dealing with like full disclosure, a couple vendors and a client-side individual on the issue of BCDR. Particularly as these environments do their cloud migrations, or some of them choose to remain on-prem, or you have to deal with a hybrid model. And in your case, I find it particularly interesting because you're a SCADA environment that deals with some very high security OT. How do you find the current, approaches to BCDR functioning in your respective worlds? And where do you guys see the future of protecting our environment should catastrophe happen and data recovery? How is this looking? Not only today, but in the next 5 or 10 years, balled up in the air for anyone?
I can go if you want. Sure. So, again, since with Azure, it definitely helps with the recovery time objectives and point objectives, right? But the ransomware is always a concern about, again, that lateral movement. So I think where the solutions are evolving to is immutable backups and isolated recovery environments for the very critical applications. And this, again, is more the information technology side, not operational technology, because being in the cloud, there are some isolated recovery environment options that you can look at and are available. But it's, again, for me, when I look at BCPDR, every BCPDR that I've seen is always for an IT incident versus a security ransomware incident. So So the recovery time objectives that I see are not really possible if it's a ransomware. Because if you look at the average time that you recover from ransomware, sometimes 14 days or 24 days, you'll never see a RTO objective like that. It's always 4 hours or 24 hours, right? Recovery, that's what I've seen. And there's actually been a lot of education that we've had to do at the board level to say, that's not possible. So we actually need to have specific RTO or RPOs if it's a ransomware attack.
I'll jump in and say this. Ties it back into what I think we talked about earlier. These environments are emerging. Understand that they have to be separate and bifurcated in many instances. But at the organizational planning perspective, where we don't see a good job being done is the incident response plans, playbooks for both sides, right? So when something does happen, it's the same team. You're probably the CISO of both or about to come. That's where I see it going. They are merging. So having a consolidated plan playbook, right? Understanding the policies should be the same. The nodes are going to be treated differently, but the stakeholders around are the same, right? You could have breach response, you have your breach coaches, you have external legal and all the different stakeholders. I see that needing to come together operationally, and then we can start seeing how the systems play together.
Sweet.
What they said, I totally agree. I mean, from both angles, absolutely.
So we have just under 3 minutes left, and I'll give you guys kind of like 45 to 60 seconds. We'll take some liberties. What are your closing thoughts on how do we best approach remote work today and leading into tomorrow? Mike, go ahead.
I would say it's real. Again, your 4 walls of your organization have moved, right? The end user is now the perimeter, and you have to protect that user. And there are solutions out there to give you the visibility and control to protect it. You no longer have to backhaul traffic. You can use the raw internet and be actually faster with more security and visibility. And remember too now, the fact that a lot of your users are using these applications in the cloud, you look at a lot of malware and threats lately, guess where they're coming from? They're coming from cloud applications, right? So that's going to become more and more prevalent. So again, going back to that security and visibility into all SaaS applications. And again, the biggest ones are the ones you don't know about, right? Because on legacy, tools can only tell you so much about what a user is doing and where they're actually going. You need to understand what they're doing, and there are tools in place to say, regardless if I own that or not, I can have controls on that, I can put threat on that, and I can give them better user experience.
Mike?
I think Michael hit it. Just to add, I think the wall gardens are coming down. Having your head in the sand is not probably going to work in terms of user experience and understanding that threat vectors are now abroad and they're multiplying every day. The one thing I would say is in closing is it's easy to stand up here not knowing your organizations and saying how much staff and the capabilities you have in terms of skill sets. So always look for vendors that can also augment that, right? So if it's like just not EDR, look at like MDR, XDR, what else can they help you with from a staff augmentation to help you? I think that's something that companies are struggling with right now. The remote inject has just made it worse because now you have all these remote nodes. So work with companies that aren't just trying to sell you products and solutions, but also have some services to help you manage them as well.
Agreed. Ranjika?
We can't bury our head in the sand for sure. Like remote work is here to stay. SaaS applications are here to stay. It's about really kind of looking at your solutions and understanding where your gaps are and closing them. I think visibility is one, and really making sure that the tools or solutions that you have give you the visibility that you need, because if the worst was to happen, how would you respond to it, right? How would you detect, how would you respond, and how would you recover? So making sure that you've looked at your whole ecosystem and being prepared for the worst.
Thank you very much, everyone. And congratulations, guys, for finishing with less than 10 seconds to go. I appreciate our panelists' time. Thank you, everyone, for paying attention this morning.